Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for our virtual field day. I'm Liz Ripley. I'm the Conservation and Cover Crop Outreach Specialist with the Iowa Learning Farms, and I'm thrilled to have you all with us today. We're going to be focusing in on diversified agricultural system right here in Iowa, and a little bit about the Iowa Learning Farms for those of you that may be new to joining us. We were established in 2004 with the goal of building a culture of conservation, working with farmers and researchers to implement practices that improve water quality and improve soil health while remaining profitable. So we're going to see how Wendy Johnson, our speaker today, does all of that with her system. Field days like this one and our in-person events as well are made possible through our partnerships, and that includes the Iowa Department of Agriculture and Land Stewardship, the USDA Natural Resources Conservation Service, Iowa State University Extension and Outreach, the Leopold Center for Sustainable Agriculture, our Iowa Department of Natural Resources, US EPA Section 319, our Conservation Districts of Iowa, the Iowa Farm Bureau, Practical Farmers of Iowa, GrowMark, Iowa Agriculture Water Alliance, Iowa Corn, the Iowa Nutrient Research Center, and the Seed Change Project. So in the chat, I just submitted a message that if you want to ask questions at any time, feel free to do so by submitting those questions to me. You'll also have the opportunity that if you would like to ask a question directly, you can raise your hand or somehow indicate to me in the chat that you would like to be unmuted, and I can make that possible for you to ask your question directly as well. So following today's virtual field day, you will be getting an email that will include the recording of today's virtual field day. So if there was someone who you knew wanted to attend but didn't make it, you can share that recording with them. But we also ask for your feedback. So there'll be a quick evaluation for you to share your feedback from today's virtual field day. We're going to be exploring how Wendy Johnson and her husband, Johnny Rankin, started and continue to manage the Jóia Food and Fiber Farm, the mission to farm holistically and grow food for people through the use of diversified agricultural systems and direct marketing of meat, grain, wool, and other products that they are producing. So I'd like to welcome you all and especially our speaker, Wendy Johnson, who is a Floyd County farmer and an Iowa Learning Farms farmer partner and co-owner of the Jóia Food and Fiber Farm. So we're going to play a video here. Once the video is done playing, we'll have some discussion. There'll be time for Q&A, and then there's a second video we'll be highlighting where, again, there'll be more time for Q&A. So please join us as we get a tour and look at Wendy's farm.
Hi, my name is Wendy Johnson. I'm a farmer in Floyd County, Charles City, and I'm a food farmer. We graze sheep and cattle on 130 acres. More specifically, right now on 50 acres. We grow some organic grains as well as some pigs and chickens and turkeys and some other poultry. We have a market farm. We direct market the majority of our meats to consumers, and soon some of our grains. Well, I moved here in 2010, and I actually didn't start this farm until 2015. I really needed to understand basic agronomy because I work on our family farm. It's a corn and soybean farm, and just learn about what's it take to grow a corn plant, for example. So I took the first 4 or 5 years to really learn about not only conventional ag, but organic agriculture and other types of diverse systems, and decided what kind of farm that we wanted to build here. So this farm used to be corn and soybeans. This riparian area behind me was much narrower, and it was grazed with sheep. So it had no trees, it was overgrazed, and it wasn't the best forage available. No other kind of really diversity on this farm. And we've, over the last 8 years now, we've integrated tree plantings in the last 5. So we've planted a number of trees and shrubs, both for nuts and fruits and hardwoods for the last 5 years. Restoring this riparian buffer, widening it, putting in fences again, and integrating livestock into our crop rotations. We started that I started transitioning to organic in 2014, and we had some row crop rotations, and we'd integrate the sheep into our pasture forage time frame. in that rotation. Meanwhile, we've had these like pretty torrential flooding events in 16 and 18 specifically that really helped us decide that we wanted to, when I say we, it's my husband and I, that we wanted to keep some of that acreage into forage. And so we now pasture more and crop less. And so now we've also integrated custom grazing. So we now custom graze some cattle, cow-calf pairs as extra added income. And we've added kernza as a small grain. It's a perennial grain that's no-till. So we are now 100% on this 130 acres perennial. No tillage, no chemicals, and it's a dream. I knew that I didn't really want to work with chemicals that much. I also knew that I didn't want to sit in a tractor all the time. And I love using my body and moving around and walking around and being physical. Both my husband and I do. And we get to work with animals, which is great, on the livestock on the land. And it just, we wanted to grow food for people. So we wanted to bring that kind of, back in 2010, it was really hard to find local food. And that has since changed, which has just been wonderful. And we've really been able to grow food for people, not only animal proteins, but also with our grains. And so just getting that interaction and contact with the consumer to the farmer, and tying in, even we invite kids to the farm, getting them involved, learning what's growing, seeing what's happening, it's just really exciting. And so we've really enjoyed that consumer farmer relationship. So our grains are, I'm going to take kernza for example. It is for brewing and for flour. We've given a little bit to our chickens and things, so it's really a food grade crop. And so kind of getting an increase in a resilient and robust food shed, meaning that our grains can go to a local brewery, a craft brewery, for example. Our grains can go to a local mill. We're doing this with fiber as well. And then to a local consumer is what I'm talking about. We hope to have soon packaged goods that have a farm name or the cooperative name of the grain in a flour that home bakers can use for their kitchens. So how resilient are we? We are incredibly resilient. So when we talked about flooding earlier, now we're in a drought. We've been able to we don't feed any hay. We have not had to feed any hay during the last 3 years of drought. Obviously we feed hay in the wintertime, but in the growing season, we've had enough forage using our adaptive grazing, rotational grazing, to really be able to provide enough forage for our cows and sheep. So it's just really amazing. If you let the land rest, it grows back. It's not like it's magic. It's just that it's perennial. That's the power of perennials. And you asked a question earlier that I don't think I touched on exactly about what we've done on this farm and why it's so why is it so different and unique and why we did it. I'd like to see this kind of diversification. If you think about all the farms in Iowa, for example, what if every farm just had a little bit of diversification added onto it? Like, let's say they restored a riparian area. Let's say they planted 5 acres of trees. Let's say they put some forage and livestock, on 50 acres. Whatever the ratio might be, we might be in a much different, in a more resilient place than we are right now. In the last 10 years, we've seen pretty big changes in terms of, for example, food farmers, market farmers. They might be small, but they exist. And for example, we get people that email us every year. They want to intern on this farm or apprentice. We take about 2 a year. We have to turn some down. When we have apprentices, we offer a farm stay with us. like a room and board. And then there's also, we've partnered with some small apartments in town that they could stay at. So our apprentices and interns, they come from all over the nation. So we have one right now from Texas. Earlier this year, we had one from San Diego County, another one from Wisconsin. I work on a conventional farm too, and I can't get anybody to work on that farm to help me like bring in the harvest and things. The future of agriculture is this. It's diverse, it's fun, it's joyful. You see life. Our farm is supporting life and growing life. And I mean, we see frogs and snakes and all different kinds of mammals and birds. And it's just fun to be outside and working with the livestock and the wildlife and everything. So it's just really exciting to see that there is strong interest in this kind of agriculture. And when I say this kind of agriculture, it's a diversified system. It's not just an annual row crop, it is multiple things.
All right. Well, thank you again for joining us today. If you have questions for Wendy, I do encourage you to put those in the chat, as we'll have a discussion here following that video. I do have a few questions that have come in so far. So the first question is, how did you find markets for the Kernza? Oh, sorry, Wendy, you're still muted.
I knew I was going to do that. All right, can you hear me okay? All right. The Kernza market. So that is a ongoing and shifting market. It's very, very new. And I personally have always believed that if I'm going to grow something, and if it's new, if it's something new, I also have to help grow that market. And so I'm currently on the board of directors of the Perennial Promise Growers Cooperative, which is a co-op that works with the grains that come out of the University of Minnesota's Forever Green initiative. And Kernza is one of those grains. And so we are focusing on really building the demand and the supply at the same time. So there is demand right now for regenerative organic Kernza. It's an ROC certification, and for brewers and for flour mills. But the conventional and the regular organic, certified organic, we are helping build that market. So it's not a really strong market right now. It's a fairly new grain. If you think about Kernza, it's only about 15 years old, I think, compared to like a corn. Corn is, at least in the United States, is many, many years old and has a lot of money back behind all the development and markets and everything and technology. So it's fairly young. And so building a market is really, it takes a while. So, but we're working on it, and there's a movement and there's strong demand for it. So can I say there's a strong market for it right now? No, but there will be. And I feel pretty optimistic about that. And I wanted to show you, speaking of Kernza, in the video we talked about, I talked about potentially having flour. So we just got our bags of flour, of Kernza flour, that we'll be selling through our farm store. So really excited about that.
That is awesome. And someone else commented on the video as well, and that it's amazing what you're doing. And we're so thrilled that you're willing to share your experiences with us as a farmer partner and through today's virtual field day. So someone commented that this transition to the style of agriculture, it seems to be a big one. Do you have any tips for somebody interested in transitioning away from conventional agriculture to more of a diversified system like you have here?
So I started out, I think I said in the video, I started out with transitioning to organic first. And that was a really big step because everybody else around me is conventional and I have to worry about drift and things like that. And so, excuse me, the biggest piece of advice that I received from a lot of my mentors, which is one piece that I would really recommend for anyone that's transitioning is either get on a farm that has transitioned to a different system, and visit with that farmer or farmers, have mentors. That'd be another. But I started small, and that was the biggest piece of advice that I got. So I started with transitioning 27 acres, I think it was. And then I transitioned another 20 acres and another 20 acres and so forth until I felt kind of more comfortable and I had the tools and the infrastructure. So that's what I would recommend as the top three things.
And in that vein, so establishing the transition to organic, but you also do a lot of direct marketing. As you just noted, you have your flour there, you do your meat and your wool. If someone's looking to start a direct market system, where do you recommend starting? Online, in person? Where's a good starting point that you found in your system?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sorry if I didn't touch on that earlier. So yeah, the direct marketing piece is pretty big because we wanted to grow food for people. That was one of our missions. And so we started out a simple place as farmers market. So we did a farmers market for 2 years, and we collected email addresses. And we realized after 2 years, this was a little bit unsustainable for us with all the different enterprises that we have. And so that's in 2000, I think it was 18, we started an e-commerce platform. And luckily we did that before COVID, because that really took off in terms of people wanting their food. And so I hate to say that COVID thrust, put us into overdrive a little bit, but it did, and it was really quite helpful. But yeah, just getting people's email addresses and getting your name out there and telling your story is one of the biggest pieces. And I write a newsletter every month. And actually, because we use a buying club system for our direct marketing, so we deliver to a pickup location every other week to certain drop sites, and then we also ship to the upper Midwest. We provide a newsletter, and I get a lot of feedback from that newsletter. We have over 60% open rate, which is really good for a newsletter. And I get a lot of comments back that they really enjoy reading it and they learn so much from it. And I think that's a really great way to market yourself and market your products, is just by telling your story, and just telling what you observe, because all those people, they can't physically get to your farm. But if you show pictures and you explain things, it tells a story, and a great one.
And so someone's curious, so maybe ballpark range here of what percentage of your family income is able to be sustained by this farm entity itself versus off-farm employment or working on the conventional farm. Like if someone's realistically trying to make this transition, what could they expect on 130 acres to supplement their income or replace their income?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And as you know, there's all these different variables, right? For example, this year we did, like I said in the video, we don't have to feed hay. Well, we did. And so we'd had no rain. It was just a lack of rainfall here. And we're in a D3 drought and continuing in a pretty severe drought. And we don't know what next year is going to look like. But and hay is fairly expensive. So it kind of depends on the year of what your expenses might be, and depending on what your enterprises are. We also have had some cost share activity through the USDA, which has been really helpful to help start. That's for like some internal fencing, manage rotational grazing, and there's water lines, shade structures. There's a lot of cost share, USDA cost share available that has really helped us really start our business on the right foot without having to borrow a bunch of money, which one would have to do if you had like a conventional farm and you wanted to buy a new tractor, or you need to buy your inputs for your crop, for example. So those cost share activities has really helped. I would say that this farm business on 130 acres is a standalone business. So it's making money, but it's just not making as much money as like a conventional corn system would. We've really had to work hard at the markets. So again, creating the markets. And there is some time commitment with that. And so, but once it's going, we're now we started this business in 2015. So we're now starting in our 9th year. It takes some time. So don't expect that you're going to make money in the first 2 to 3 years, maybe the 3rd year. You'll be starting to make more money, but the more customers you get, the more obviously, and you've already really invested in the infrastructure of everything. So that is already, in place. And you're always trying to improve on labor and efficiency in that way too. So to say that what percentage of my income, for example, it's kind of hard to say because we have this, I also farm on a conventional farm. And so that is like an off-farm job, but I'm still farming. That's sort of an off-farm job. But my husband, Johnny, he is actually now full-time on the farm. So we've been able to, he used to have an off-farm job, and now he is full-time on the farm, which is really great that we can afford to do that. But I don't want to really give you a ballpark percentage because I actually don't really, it varies from year to year and depending on what cost share and what kind of programs are available, which I think are increasing as we see some of this Inflation Reduction Act programming through climate smart commodities that are really emphasizing diversification, biodiversity, and perennials. So there's the planting the trees, for example, is quite expensive, and there was cost share for that. But there's really increasing, exciting dollar amounts that are being offered right now that we've actually missed out on because we were more early adopters. But they're much higher than they were when we started it. So I guess my advice is to just try to dig into what kind of programs are available and map it out yourself and see what you might find.
And so maybe this is a good transition too, as they think about maybe what they want to do diversified wise. What's the advantage to raising sheep? And I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit in the next video, but like meat or wool, what do you recommend?
Either or I say both, but sheep are really amazing creatures because they grow this fiber it's just completely renewable. It doesn't cost you anything except for, I guess, the value in the forage. But the wool and the fiber, they just grow it. It just continues like a perennial. It just keeps growing. And the meat part of it is also we are pretty much a niche with the sheep. We're certified grass-fed, certified animal welfare approved through a greener world. And we have specific markets for that grass-fed. And I guess for anyone that's interested in this more diverse farming or diversified agricultural systems, I really recommend connecting with a certifier of whatever it is, whether it's for animal welfare, if it's for organic or regenerative. It puts you in a place that your product gets noticed. And I think that's that's been really advantageous and worked really well for us, is we have to be able to stand out, and there has to also be a market for that standout certification. which those certifications are, they're connected. They're really well connected, and they help either, get you a premium for your product or help you market that product with that certification label. So the meat and the wool have been really great. The wool business was kind of an add-on that we started during COVID, that we just didn't want to sell our wool to the shearer anymore for nothing. It was like 3 cents a pound or something crazy like that, that we were having to actually pay the shearer. And there's a lot of value in that wool, even though it's not like a fine merino wool or something like that. That wool has a lot of value. It could be made into wool pellets, for example, for fertilizer. It can be used as a weed suppressor in gardens. It can be used as wool bedding, like for us, and you can make hides out of it. And there's just a lot of and the wool fiber businesses in the United States are growing slowly, but growing.
I've had 3 questions come in related to the meat side of things. So related question is whether you're selling meat and or live animals to the locker, and do you have a local butcher that processes that?
Yes, so we use a USDA processor in southern Minnesota. That's the closest USDA processor that we can sell nationwide using that processor. And they use seasonings or cures, especially for our pork, for example, that are all natural. So they use organic seasonings, things like that, that we know that our customers want. Our processor is really great to work with. We've kind of been with them since their first or second year starting out. And the former owner of that processor is an organic farmer as well, and has a meat business, a direct market meat business in Minnesota. And so just partnering with them has been really helpful. I think one of the biggest keys to our success is having a partnership with your processor, especially if you're selling or getting into animal proteins. That relationship is really important. And I guess in general, one of the most, I think, one of our guiding pieces of what we do here is relationship building. I think that's a really big part of a farm that maybe, I mean, even on all different kinds of farms, even conventional farms, you have to have a relationship with your mechanics, your fertilizer dealer, your seed dealer, those kinds of things, your agronomists. It's similar. We have to build relationships with the people that we need that are in our business cycle.
And since you do market multiple meat types, someone's curious, are you finding that there is demand for pastured meats other than beef? For example, goats, sheep, pastured pork, etc.
So we don't market a lot of beef, but we do a lot with sheep. We have we actually, we don't have enough beef to sell, and I sometimes have to buy beef from other producers, the grass-fed beef, which we're trying to grow that enterprise so we can fulfill it ourselves. But I guess the marketing of the question was on marketing, right, Liz? Okay.
Yeah, so are you seeing consumer requests leaning towards other grass-fed meats
Grass-fed.
that are
Okay.
beyond beef?
Okay. Our grass-fed lamb would be one. It is more, it's not as popular as beef, but and I haven't got into goat, so I don't know the goat market. And we don't grass-fed feed our sheep or I'm sorry, our pigs or chickens. So they always have access to that, but we don't strictly they can't be grass-fed strictly. They're omnivores. So, but the ruminants like goats, sheep, beef, or cattle. Am I missing one ruminant? But they're we just mostly work with beef and lamb.
We have one more question here, and then we'll go to our next video. So this is kind of tying back. You got your curds of flour. Are you milling that yourself, or do you have someone that is doing that for you?
Yeah, so great question. So a kernza has a hull, and majority of small grains have hulls, and so the grain has to be cleaned, and then it has to be dehulled before it can go to a mill. And then the mill, we like to use mills that use that are stone mills, to grind the grains. They're specific in terms of what kind of flour they get. And so we go through a specific mill that then mills that into a flour. There's two mills, one in Iowa and one in Minnesota that we're using currently. And yeah, I'm really excited about this because it just happened. And I'm really glad to be providing kernza flour. I think it's a really needed and desired product that people have been asking for, and it's hard to find sometimes.
Excellent. So keep your questions coming in. I'm going to be playing part 2 of our video series, and we'll continue our conversation after that. So I look forward to seeing you all here in just a moment.
So today we're having a field day, and we've invited people out to check out our diversified agriculture systems. One of those pieces is agroforestry. We've been implanting trees for the last 5 years, but in the last probably 3, we've realized we have a hotter planet. We are going to be dealing with a lot more drought and higher and extreme heat. And we need shade. And so we have some shade structures that we move around with our animals, but trees are really some of the best pieces of our farm that are resilient. And I consider trees kind of our insurance policy. They help with the water cycle. I mean, any kind of perennial helps with the water cycle, but it also, where animals can get under to get shade. They're more productive when they are less heat stressed. And so we started integrating silvopasture. We planted our first silvopasture here this year. So they're very small trees, year-old trees. And by year 3, we'll be able to graze those with sheep only, not cattle. It's okay if the sheep start to eat some of the lower leaves. It's actually good for the tree. And within 5 years, by 10 years, we'll probably thin out some. And then, those trees they're all hardwoods, native hardwoods. They're gonna be here for 100 years, we hope. So it's just a really great way as we're integrating some trees into our agriculture system. It's another added attribute for us to be resilient. So how did we decide to incorporate more trees into our system? I guess it kind of goes along with the whole diversity piece of it. We started thinking about nuts and fruits, edible nuts and fruits as a food source. They're making many more kinds of oils and all sorts of sweeteners with natural fruits and nuts. They're really healthy for us. They're healthy for our animals. And as we are a food farm, it's just something that we think we needed to integrate. As well as our climate is changing pretty drastically, and they're an answer to some of the really real hard stresses that we're going to be seeing in our near future, which we're already seeing. And they are, surprisingly, we've been in a drought for the last 3 years. We've planted over 5,000 trees, and you'll see on this field day just the number of survival. Those trees are just hardy and resilient, and when they get to be 50 years old, they're just going to be great. So are there opportunities on our other farm, our family farm, for trees? Absolutely. Shelter belts or windbreaks. There's going to, adding livestock with, silvopasture would be one. Alley cropping is something that I'm really interested in integrating trees with cropland. That's something that we're testing out here on some of the land that we have the silvopasture on, is how do these trees integrate with tile? As we know, majority of Iowa is heavily tiled. So we're looking at hardwood trees that are not water loving, but everyone loves nitrogen, right? So there is a lot of nitrogen flowing through our tiles in Iowa, so we're kind of taking it in baby steps. So how do sheep add to our resiliency? Sheep, for one, economically, pound per pound, make more money than cattle. I know cattle people don't want to hear that. There's lots of history on the sheep cattle wars out west. Same kind of thing. It's sheep are they're pretty resilient. They don't require a lot of, we're getting a lot of higher velocity winds, for example, in the winter and in the summer, and I guess all year round now. And they don't require as much shelter as cattle do, for example. They drink less water. They have multiple births. From birth to finish is a lot sooner. It doesn't take a year and a half or 2 years to finish a lamb. And they're just much more resilient in terms of you can use their wool also. There is a demand. You might not think that there is a demand in the United States for lamb, but there is. And there are fewer and fewer lamb producers, not more and more. So the market is really good. And they're easy to work with. They're easier to work with, and they're not as hard on facilities. So what are the kinds of things that we do seasonally? So starting with the fall, we're starting to think about, I also run a grain farm too, so I and my husband are not here as often. So our custom grazing of cattle, those cattle get moved off, and we're focusing on the sheep. The sheep are eating stockpiled forage, meaning they're still going out and getting their own forage. We might not be intensively grazing them like we do during the growing season. We do that up until about January, and then we start feeding some hay. So our chores are pretty limited in the fall because we're focusing on grain. And then in the wintertime, we're bale grazing, so we put bales of hay out on the pasture, and they nibble at those bales. So maybe once a week we're putting some bales out. And then springtime comes, we're shearing, we're lambing, a little more intense in about a 1 month period of time. April is when we lamb. And then in the summertime, we're out in the pasture every day, moving them, daily moves. We use adaptive grazing, so we're looking at the forage height and what they're leaving behind, what they're going into, and making the paddocks smaller or bigger depending on the size of the lambs. I think why this is so fun and diversified agriculture systems are so fun is because there's always challenges and there's always problems to solve. But they're not expensive things, you know? It's not like we're not running we don't run hardly any tractors. We don't utilize a lot of fossil fuel. We don't have a lot of equipment. It's really our brains and our brawn is basically what we use. I want to show people that things like this work, that diversified ag systems work. And I think a lot of people get really stuck in a box and they don't know how to get out of a box. And it doesn't take much to start something like this. It doesn't take a lot of finances or inputs to start something like this. But just to be able to know that grazing works, perennials work, setting aside some acres, not for CRP, but working lands, you know, perennial integration works. It's not farming for the environment. It's farming for yourself. The farmer gets to keep more of that dollar. You're a price maker, not a price taker, and there's a lot of freedom in that. And I think a lot of people they think maybe it's old-fashioned, or it's, you know, something that was done 100 years ago in farming, more sustainable stuff. But I think there were sustenance farmers, right, or subsistence farmers. It's not that at all. There's general consumer interest in what it is of people that are eating, where it's coming from, and gosh, I think if everyone's got a doctor and a medication, they should also have a farmer. So what are some of the first things that I think about when I wake up in the morning and I gotta do? Well, usually I think about them the night before, but when I wake up in the morning, I'm just excited to get outside or actually to my office, because sometimes in the office you make more money doing that sometimes than actually being outside doing the physical stuff. And I am so lucky I have a husband who loves just loves animals and loves working with the animals and grazing, and he loves to take that on. But the first thing I do is I go out. I want to know what our forage looks like. I want to see the health of the animals. I also want, well, I should say the very first thing I do, I get up early in the morning, we let the birds out. And I love seeing the birds out, across the landscape, doing their thing, making noises. It's like a good morning, and they're kind of the welcome committee to us people that come outside. But it's always checking on the animals, making sure all their health is all good, which it usually is. When you let animals outside and they're living on the land and eating bugs and all sorts of things, they're just healthier in general. I don't have an average day, like what I do, something that I do every single day. Johnny does, his first thing is he goes out and he starts setting up a new paddock, and how do the sheep need to get fed? How do the cattle need to get fed? Did my dad discourage me from farming? No. Actually, when I was living in California, both my sister and I were living in California, and we would come back and help, once in a while, some of the harvest, some of the planting. And I think he'd tap us on the shoulder and say, hey, one of you want to come back and farm? He was getting to the age where he's thinking about retirement, what to do next, and downsizing. He's not increasing in size, and we were just like, nah, like we're not going to, and I realized that, yes, I mean, he didn't have to ask me this time. I think he actually had stopped asking me when I finally made the realization that, yeah, I want to come back and farm. And it was food related. Like, I got really interested in food in California, and I thought, wow, I could grow really healthy food in a place that has some of the richest soils in the world, that I want to protect. And so that was kind of the impetus to that. But I think he was rather surprised that it was me and not my sister, one, and but I think he's happy that someone came back. But he never discouraged me. He never discouraged either of us to not farm. One thing that I've always remembered that he would tell me is that the land will always provide. If you steward it well, it will always provide. And I think I've taken that with me every day. So our daughter is 10 years old. She has told us that she wants to be a substitute teacher and a farmer. I'm happy with that. She's 10, and she wants to do that. I'm all for it. She loves, collecting eggs, and she'll let the birds out. She'll put the birds in. She'll help us round up, pigs and move the sheep, and she's out there. And I think one of just the greatest things that we can give to our children is the ability to get their hands dirty in the soil and touch animals and see cool flowers and plants and animals. I wish we could give all that opportunity to every child.
What an inspiring message to end on. But we have had some questions come in additionally. So someone was curious how you're utilizing any of the farm buildings that may have already existed on the site, and how that works into how you've utilized your farm.
Yeah, this, I don't know if I told you, but Jóia means, in Portuguese, it means jewel. And this particular farm is where my dad grew up and where my grandparents lived for many years. And they bought this farm. They didn't settle this farm. And so these buildings were existing here for, I don't know for how long, but they needed some work. And luckily they had some new roofs on them. And so we utilize, when we had more pigs, we utilized them quite a bit. So they already had cement lots. They had some kind of old fencing that we've since improved. The barns in general and sheds were in very good condition. So we were very lucky, and we use every single building. We converted an old corn crib into what we call a hay shed, but it ended up turning into, we were supposed to store hay there. It turned into being more of like a hog barn. And then when we sold our breeding herd for our pigs, we held our field day inside of it. So it now may become more of a, and we've hosted some other events inside that building before. And so maybe it will become our little event shed instead. But right, it is storing hay right now.
So someone's curious about the videos being posted. Yes, so this entire field day in its entirety is being recorded and will be posted to our YouTube channel. The featured videos will also be made public after today's virtual field day. So if you want to share the whole conversation, I encourage you to do that, or also any of these sub videos as well. So you can find those on our Iowa Learning Farms YouTube channel. So curious, you have some adorable dogs. So they're curious, what breed are your sheepdogs?
They're mostly Maremma, and a Maremma is like an Italian sheepdog, Italian mountain sheepdog. Super, they require very little training. It's really amazing. And we like that breed over Great Pyrenees, for example, because they don't wander as far. They don't wander as much. They're very, very dedicated to sheep, incredibly so, that it's really, we learn from them every day wow, how did we get so lucky with these dogs? But I think it's just the breed. They come from two different farms. We tried two different farms. Both were sheep farms and that are actively using adaptive management grazing and managed grazing, and they just knew the drill. They're born out on the pasture, raised out on the pasture. They're very comfortable with sheep. So if you're interested in LGD, really look to farms that maybe raise pups that come from farms that are like yours or that you want to mimic.
And I will say that they were both very protective of the herds while we were there in person, in a good way. They just let us know that they respected our presence, but also letting you and Johnny know that they were there. So let's see. It looks like my internet was maybe cutting out a little bit, so I apologize for that. But it did look, I was commenting on how your sheepdogs were definitely doing their job while we had our visitors there for the field day.
No, yeah,
they let us know.
they
So
did.
they were great. So comment and a question here. Fruit and nut trees are an investment for a good number of years. Do you have concerns about how the changing climate may impact your trees, and did that factor into the selection of your tree species?
Absolutely. So if you were at our field day, you probably saw a tall gentleman in orange. His name is Luke Gran. He's from the Ames area and owns a company called Prudentera. He helped us develop our agroforestry plan. And he's he really looked at kind of some future, what do they call it? Like graphing or climate,
Modeling, maybe?
modeling, thank you. And so, and and I think this goes true with a lot of NRCS folks too, is that diversity is the key. So you don't want to plant a monoculture of trees. You want to have a pretty wide diversity of it. For example, you know, we're seeing what's happening with our ash trees here as it moves across the ash borer moves across the United States. So you want to have and maples, you know, maybe there'll be something with maples coming up soon. So you don't want to have a monoculture of anything. And so there was a lot of, we also wanted hardwood trees that have a pretty large taproot that can tap deeper moisture levels, for example, in times of drought. And oaks in general are, and they're all native. So all the trees that we planted are native to Iowa. And so that means they're resilient trees. So diversity and then the type of trees are the two biggest pieces of that. We probably will not see, the potential like timber sales for a very long time. But even within 5 years, those trees, if you saw in the video, some of the taller trees, those are only 5 years old. And we're able to graze trees with sheep at 3 years old, so they're tall enough. And if the sheep even girdle a little bit of the leaves and branches on the bottom, that's actually really good for the trees. And we'll be thinning out some of those trees within 15 years. So they probably won't have timber quality at that time, but it will be, the idea is to thin those out so that they're pretty close spacings. If you saw in the video, the trees are pretty close, planted in close proximity to really get the tree to grow straight up versus out this way. So that was by design.
Specifically curious, you mentioned hardwoods and other species, but what kinds of trees do you grow for shade versus trees that you've selected for fruits or nuts? Are they not maybe exclusive?
Not necessarily exclusive. So a tree is a tree is a tree, right? A tree will always provide shade no matter what. So, but we decided we didn't want trees, for example, that had anything that would be poisonous to livestock. So originally we had Kentucky coffee trees in our planting plan, but we decided last minute to remove those just in case there might be some toxicity to livestock. There are some other trees that maybe provide some leaves or the pods or whatever that might be toxic, so we didn't plant those. But I guess we just wanted trees that were very resilient. We have a micro orchard that has some, which is something we didn't really visit at our field day, but it was there. We have some chestnuts, Chinese chestnuts. We planted some pawpaws and persimmons, as well as some apples, apple trees, and I'm missing one other tree I can't think of right now, but it was, those are in progress, and they're almost slightly, the apples they're more dwarf size, so they're not really the greatest for like a grazing situation. So we didn't intermix some of the apple trees with like the hardwoods. These hardwoods are going to grow very tall and probably overshade maybe some of the fruit trees if we had integrated fruit in them. But I know there are strategies to creating a silvopasture with other fruit trees and within nut trees. And I really suggest contacting the Savannah Institute, for example. They are pretty wise in terms of and they have a lot of technical assistance they can provide to people who are interested in planting trees on their lands.
And that's actually a great segue because Jen Ripp is with us today from the Savannah Institute and offered to share a little bit about some of the climate smart agroforestry programs available. So I'm going to ask Jen to join us a little bit to share a little more verbally. Yes, thank you, Jen.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. First off, thank you, Wendy Johnson, for all the work you have done as an early adopter. It's not fair that you did all this work to be an early adopter, to get these practices on the map, and now we finally have funding for them. But luckily, there's a lot of options and a lot of ways to interact with these funds. So what I'm talking about is the expanding agroforestry production. It's a large pot of money from the Nature Conservancy through the Partnership for Climate Smart Commodities. It's a 5-year grant totaling about $64 million, and that's spread out over 5 regions. And 34 million of that is going directly to farmers, not as cost share, but as full payments. So it's a really exciting program. We actually just launched it in November, and the first application cycle closes today, but don't worry, it's going to be about 2 application cycles per year over the next 5 years. So the fund is there, and a really important aspect to that funding. So it's for silvopasture, alley cropping, and windbreaks specifically. So a lot of focus on that diversification of practice and integration of agroforestry into systems. And there's also a transition fee. So that is a category where we pay farmers to transition their land from their current practices into these agroforestry, and that it's $150 per acre per year for up to 3 years. So Wendy mentioned that at the beginning of how do you start transitioning, and it costs money. It definitely does, and this program is looking at that and saying we can pay people to kind of wait until their trees come into production, whether that's for shade, fruits, nuts, things like that, or at least like help with that. 3 years is not enough for a tree to produce nuts, but it certainly helps kind of push people in that direction. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to go on Savannah Institute's website, or you can go right to Google search expanding agroforestry production. Sorry, I'm out, I'm out in the barn right now, so I can't put it in the chat. But also a really important thing that happened this year is we have technical service providers in Iowa now through the Savannah Institute for free. So if you want to be part of that, so all that Wendy talked about, and thank you again, Wendy, for your investment in agroforestry, we can now offer to other folks. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions via email. I'm pretty easy to find. Jen, Jenn at SavannahInstitute.org. Thanks for your time, and thank you again so much, Wendy. We got to catch up about drain tiles.
Sure do.
Excellent. Well, there's still time for a few more questions, so go ahead and get those in the chat. I've got a few housekeeping things I want to share here before we sign off. Because if you watch today's virtual field day for a CCA CEU, please email me. My email is ejuchems@iastate.edu by 5 p.m. today. I'll also put my email in the chat so you can copy it out of there, but I'll ask you to provide your name, the name you entered to watch today, and your CCA number. And then similar to those of you that may be familiar with our webinars, we also are offering, if you are interested in an edge of field practice, you can contact me in that same email, and I will help connect you with someone at Iowa Department of Ag and Land Stewardship. So again, if you're interested in diversifying your land through an implementation of an edge of field practice, I'd be happy to provide a connection for you. And then we will have this survey available as well. Again, if you attended one of our virtual field days earlier this year or a webinar and have already completed this voluntary demographic survey, you do not need to complete it again. But if you haven't, we ask that you check that out at iowalearningfarms.org/survey, or you can get your phone out and scan this QR code to take you directly to that survey. It should take you no more than maybe 2 minutes at max to complete that. We appreciate everyone who has done so already this year. And while we're wrapping up 2023, we do have a full slate of virtual field days scheduled for 2024, the next one being January 18th, where we'll be talking about pasturing oxbows, so optimizing benefits to the farm, water, and wildlife. So with that, there have been a couple questions. Someone is very curious on how they can get your newsletter, Wendy.
Yeah, they can subscribe to our newsletter on our website. It's I'll put it in the chat. It's where our farm store is located. So if you're interested in buying some of this really great Kernza flour, it comes in 4-pound bags. You will be able to order it starting on Monday. But you can sign up at joiafoodfarm.com, and I'll put it in the chat right now. At the bottom of the screen, there's a way to sign up for our newsletter.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Wendy, for all you do and for your time today and sharing your story. We're thrilled to have shared it with so many folks live today. And again, this is recorded, so feel free to share this with other folks and check it out again if you want to revisit anything. And there at that website, you can find Wendy and make that connection either as a client or if you're interested in doing something similar for your operation as well. So thank you again, Wendy, and we wish everyone a safe and happy holiday season.
Thank you.